Francis Ngannou is back. He's the king. Watch this video. Hello, welcome to Ed Son. I hope you're all well. So Francis Ngannou made his PFL debut last night against Renan Ferreira, and I thought that it was going to be a tough test for Francis Ngannou. I just looked at the footage of Ferreira. I thought, what a beast he was. They were calling it, the fight of the giants or whatever it was called, the battle of the giants, and it truly was. These two man-mountains just went into the octagon, and I thought, wow, let the sparks fly, let's go. Now, there was an early leg kick from Francis Ngannou, and I thought Ferreira was going to go flat on his ass. Then Ferreira did exactly the same to Ngannou. Then basically went to the ground, and I thought, oh, okay, here we go. It's just going to be, a boring fight. And then all of a sudden, I thought, well, Ferreira's got him. He's got him in a position that Ngannou was going to struggle. Then Ngannou got out of it, and then also he just ground and pounded him, and it was just so convincing by Ngannou. But at the same time, I was really sort of disappointed. And Ferreira, I thought he put up a much bigger fight. But the point is, if you're under somebody like Ngannou who's just putting all his weight on you, it's going to be very hard to get out, no matter how big you are. And he just will let leash with a volley of punches. And I think the one that really knocked Ferreira out was the one, for me, it hit the back of his head. And I think he got repeatedly hit just behind the left area. And he just kept on pounding, and a few went into the ear, and a few were coming on from the right, so uppercuts as well. But it was this one here, I think that's the one that really finished him off. I mean, obviously it was an accumulation. But look, brilliant display again. And so he is now world champion, PFL world champion. Obviously, he is still the world champion of UFC, I suppose you could argue, because he went out still as a champion. He was never beaten. So the interesting thing was, after the fight, the ring announcer or the interviewer said, okay, what are you going to do next and all that. And obviously it was, it was a sad moment, a touching moment, because he was paying tribute to his son who died in a few months ago in April, was it? So, but he's basically said, what's next? And he was kind of very non-committal about the whole process. Now, for me, he's got two ways he can go. He could either stay in the MMA world or go back to boxing. Now, the big story or the big rumour is that Francis Ngannou definitely wants to come back to boxing. Or should I say, he wants to go back into a rematch with Tyson Fury. That's, I suppose, as far as he wants to get into the boxing world. Now, I'm not sure where there's an appetite from boxing fans to see Francis Ngannou back in the ring in terms of general boxing. I think there is an appetite to see whether Francis Ngannou can actually repeat what he did the first time around against Tyson Fury. Now, whether this will ever happen, I don't know, because obviously Tyson Fury is against Usyk. Then we're talking about, well, what next after that? Depends what AJ does in terms of a rematch against Dubois. Will these two ever get on? Will there be a trilogy between Tyson Fury and Usyk? The list is endless. So for me, Ngannou definitely wants to get back into the boxing because that's where the big money is. He knows that. That's where the big money is for these big prize fights. But in terms of him dominating, then he's got to stay in the MMA world. But the question is, and you guys are going to tell me, because I actually don't know, who is going to be any kind of challenge for Francis Ngannou in the PFL. I'm not sure there is much of a challenge out there. I've been doing a bit of research this morning in terms of heavyweights. I'm not sure there's much of a challenge there. I could be mistaken, but the way Francis Ngannou fights, the way he took it to the ground, the way he can stand and fight as well, his position, his footwork was pretty good just in the short period that we saw, but he took it to the ground, and the ground and pound that he did, it's just, wow, so impressive. I don't think there's any competition there in the PFL. Now, could we see a big crossover between the different organisations, UFC, PFL, ONE, whomever, Octagon, or whoever? Could we see something like that? I just don't think that's ever going to happen. I'd be very surprised if there's going to be some kind of super fight across the different organisations. I'd be very surprised. So what's the next thing? Well, you got to be looking at the likes of ex or current world champions in the UFC. If they leave the UFC, if they run out of contract, could you make super fights there? So I'm talking Stipe Miocic, who's supposed, going to be fighting John Jones. Well, if that ever happens, of course. And what happens after that? Will there be any appetite for Stipe Miocic to say, I've left the UFC now, let me go and have a super prize fight against the PFL world champion now, Francis Ngannou? I'm not sure there'd be much of an appetite for that either. What there would be an appetite for is John Jones. If John Jones, after his next fight, retires from the UFC and he's out of contract, he's got no more fights that he's contracted to fight. And I know he does go and watch the PFL, and I know he's watched Ferreira fight a few times as well. So he's very familiar with the organisation, and obviously everybody's always talked about this super fight between Francis Ngannou and John Jones. That's the fight that could be made. That's the fight that, if in the MMA world, that will probably be the biggest fight ever. So for me, Francis Ngannou, if he stays in the PFL, if he stays in MMA, I should say, then really he's got to be searching for the big super fights, because I just don't think there's anybody there coming up that's an absolute match for him. Even the commentator said on the broadcast that I was watching, said he is the ultimate heavyweight champion of the world. He is the absolute heavyweight champion of the world. And I think regardless of which organisation you're with, I think most people can agree that he's just a force to be reckoned with. If he'd stayed in the UFC, who knows what could have happened? Who knows if John Jones could have come along or would have beaten him? We just don't know. We just don't know. Many people say no, there's no chance. Many people say no, Francis Ngannou doesn't have a chance against John Jones. Look, we don't know, because this is just opinion. This is just predictions based upon no data, really, because they haven't actually fought each other. But if John Jones comes out of the UFC, because I don't think ever the UFC and the PFL are ever going to have some kind of collaboration on a super fight, that would be fantastic if these organizations did. I think it would be brilliant, just as in boxing, when you've got WBC, WBA, WBO, IBO, if you want to consider them as well, different organizations, they come together and have super fights. The bouts are on the line here. So why can't you have a UFC world champion against a PFL world champion and saying, right, let's have a super fight. Let's just see who is the DBs here. That's never going to happen. But only if a fighter like John Jones comes out of contract, then you've got the ultimate fight against Francis Ngannou. Let us know your thoughts here. I mean, look, there are other heavyweights there who would really put an interesting challenge to Francis Ngannou, I'm sure. I'm thinking mostly of something like somebody like Tom Aspinall, but he is so heavily ingrained in the UFC, of course. And by the time he comes out of the UFC, Francis Ngannou is going to be retired. He's going to be long gone by then. I'm sure he's 38 years old now. I mean, how many years can he go on for this? And what would be his own personal appetite to continue as well? He said the only reason he wanted to come back in, is for his son who sadly passed away, Kobe, as well. But so, you got to ask, well, what is his next step? And that was the question. What is going to be your next step? It's going to have to be a super fight in inverted commas. And it's going to either have to go back into boxing with a Tyson Fury rematch, but that is so far down the line because of Tyson Fury's commitments. I can't see that happening anytime soon. And I can't really see him going into any fight with any other boxer unless they pull it out of the bag and say, okay, go and fight Daniel Dubois or something. But that, for me, would just be a nonsense fight. And I don't think boxing fans would welcome it. We've already seen the MMA crossing into the boxing world. It's failed. We don't want to see it again. Well, that's my opinion. Many people would. There's the only appetite is to see a rematch between Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou to see, okay, can he repeat it again? Now, obviously, again, it really depends on what Tyson Fury's pathway is going to be for the next few months. But again, time is not on Francis Ngannou's side here. So for me, stay in the MMA world, get some big fights if you can, with some major heavyweights out there. But for me, the only fight for me, for Francis Ngannou, is to wait for the big heavyweights that are retiring out of the UFC, out of contract, offer them big money to come and fight in the PFL, just even a one-off fight, just a one-off fight against Francis Ngannou, against whoever, John Jones, Stipe Miocic, whoever it is. If they can sort out the terms, if they can sort out the contracts, if they can sort something out, because I really can't see the organizations going up against each other. I really can't see it. So this is the only option for Francis Ngannou. He needs to fight. He needs to keep on fighting, because he's proven that it's not a struggle for him. I thought this fight against Ferreira was going to be a struggle for him. I wasn't convinced he was going to win, in all fairness. Yeah, complete casual here, but I just didn't think he was going to win. But I thought, wow, what? You've been two years at the MMA octagon. You got into boxing. You've been distracted. This is my thought process. I thought he's been distracted by boxing. He's not gonna, and 38 years old. Time's moving on. But no, he just showed, what a beast he is. Stay in the MMA world. Get some high-profile fights. Who they're ever going to be, let us know in the comments below. But for me, there's only one thing he can do. Have that super fight with John Jones when John Jones leaves the UFC. That's the fight. That's the fight that would be a pay-per-view sensation. It would be a pay-per-view monster. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like what I do here, hey, just keep on watching the videos and I'll catch you again. Bye now.